The European Union's Special Envoy for Peace in Colombia has expressed the bloc's concern regarding the deaths of demonstrators during the national strike protests. Nicaragua faces international pressure, especially from the United States, ahead of the upcoming presidential elections in November. President of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Jong-Un, has warned the population to be prepared for conflict as much as for dialogue with the United States. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. The European Union's Special Envoy for Peace in Colombia has expressed the bloc's concern regarding the deaths of demonstrators during the national strike protests. European official Eamon Gilmore met with President Ivan Duque to express concern regarding the violent acts of the security forces and reiterated his commitment to ensure accountability for the serious abuses and human rights violations. Activists and NGOs have collected data on over 70 deaths, the majority of which are thought to have been at the hands of the security forces. A new death was reported in the city of Cali precisely during Gilmore's visit.
I spoke to the President about the concern we have in Europe surrounding the death of demonstrators, and the President reiterated his commitment to ensure accountability and that the applicable reforms be implemented, and these issues will be addressed, and that everything triggering the demonstrations will be addressed. And we also spoke about the need and willingness to have a dialogue at the national, regional and local levels.
And staying in Colombia, several groups have defied the National Strike Committee's temporary suspension of street demonstrations. One person was reported dead in the city of Cali. At least one protester dead, 20 wounded and 8 arrested was the balance of the latest repression in Cali in southwestern Colombia, one of the epicenters of the protests. Although street demonstrations were temporarily suspended by the strike committee, several groups ignored the call in Cali, Bogotá, Neiva and other places, putting up barricades and holding marches. All met with the usual brutality of President Ivan Duque's anti-riot police units. The interim president of Peru, Francisco Sagasti, has publicly condemned a call from retired soldiers for the armed forces to prevent the leftist and winning presidential candidate, Pedro Castillo, from eventually being proclaimed the winner of the June 6 runoff vote. Fears of a possible coup and calls for another election have emerged as losing candidate Keiko Fujimori continues to cry fraud, while the electoral authorities are yet to officially announce the winner as they study each of her claims.
What is unacceptable is that a group of retired people from the armed forces intends to incite the high command of the Army, Navy and Air Force to break the rule of law. Yesterday, letters with only one signature and a list of names were presented to the General Commands of the Armed Forces and directed to the General Commanders and the head of the Joint Command of the Armed Forces, asking that they act against the Constitution and laws. As Constitutional President of the Republic, I reject this type of communication, which are not only contrary to democratic values and institutional framework, but are also acts at odds with the Constitution and the laws.
Patricia Guerrera is a Mexican woman used to diesel and wrenches. She, along with family members that spread 4 generations, all women, runs an auto repair shop called Tire Chief in Mexico City. Patricia and her family defy stereotypes in a society where women's rights demands have become more persistent under hostile contexts. Amid a new wave of activist movements and gender equality campaigns, the story of Patricia stands out as a proud female mechanic. She inherited the shop after her father died and since then works with 15 women of her kin, mainly focused on tire and rim repairs.
My father, who founded this workshop, had a lot of problems with male employees. They would go out drinking and sometimes failed to show up for work. So he wanted to hire women because he believed they were more responsible.
It's a shame that there are those who think it's strange that women are working here. These days, we must recognize that women can do anything that men can. So I was delighted to hear about this place.
If you want it, you can do it. No one can place limits on what you can do. Your ability, your intelligence. You alone can define that.
A rival gunfight among inmates of a maximum security prison in Honduras left at least 5 people dead. Members of the rival street gangs Barrio 18 and Mara Salvatrucha held a gunfight in La Tolva prison east of the capital, Tegucigalpa. A spokesperson for the Justice Ministry, Yuri Mora, admitted that prison guards could not even dream of intervening. He said that forensics came afterward to pick up the bodies and launched a ritual investigation. Barrio 18 and Mara Salvatrucha gangs control large urban areas and even rural areas. Territorial disputes for drug trafficking, weapons, auto theft and other businesses are common. They also control, it seems, the jails. Some 31,000 Cuban children with disabilities are waiting for the reopening of their special schools, now closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it's not the pandemic, but the United States blockade that's the greatest impediment for their therapy, learning and recovery. Jocelyn is 11 years old and has already overcome 5 surgeries to correct malformations caused by cerebral palsy since birth. Walking, running and riding a bicycle are already within her reach, but the lack of medication and orthopedic equipment Cuba cannot buy because of the US blockade raises barriers to her already successful development. Also, the brothers Ramdal and Riolan with intellectual disabilities depend on medications and resources that the so-called sanctions deny them. Yet their progress does not stop. Sewing and speech therapy help them develop motor skills and communication, while hoping for a world without punishment for those who choose to be free.
In the case of Riolan, he needs carbamazepine, and there have been times when there is none. And it's the mom looking everywhere. The child anxious because he wants to come to school, because he wants to be, but when he doesn't manage to control his anxiety. The blockade really is unhuman. First of all, because everything would have been easier from the point of view of learning in school itself. That is, in a school there would have been better conditions for teaching these children or preparing them for life.
And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Nicaragua is 5 months away from holding presidential elections. The country is under international pressure and the United States is trying to interfere in its internal affairs by financing opposition groups seeking to destabilize the country, authorities say. We have more in this report by our correspondent Maria Jose Diaz.
The country's streets are calm. Santos Eugenio Badilla Muñoz tells us that he was a victim of violence by opposition groups during the coup attempt in April 2018. He owned a business and has practically lost it. Now he's starting again.
I wish for the best, which is peace, as we have always fought and worked for the development of peace by supporting our projects that are already in place and that we cannot throw away for someone else to come and finish.
At the end of 2020, the Defense of the Rights of the Peoples to Independence, Sovereignty and Self-Determination for Peace Act was approved. A law that Nicaraguan authorities point out has been violated by opposition sectors that, despite promoting a smear campaign against the country's institutions, are getting ready for the next electoral process. In this alliance, we are firmly determined to select a presidential candidate with capacity, who generates confidence in the citizens, and we will not give up this objective. Political expert Freddy Franco explains that the most recent legal actions of the Nicaraguan authorities towards opposition sectors should be understood as an effort to defend national sovereignty in the context of the ongoing United States campaign to interfere in the country's internal affairs and destabilize it by financing opposition sectors in an attempt to oust the constitutional government of President Daniel Ortega.
The people and institutions that are being prosecuted in Nicaragua are being prosecuted because they have committed crimes. They have used that money for purposes other than those established by law. They have even hidden money. They have laundered money, and indeed you know that not only in Nicaragua, but at the international level there are laws, strong international legislations that fight organized crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, a series of crimes that affect international economic relations and the security of institutions and states.
According to recent investigations, the United States Agency for International Development allocated $5.2 million in 2017 to opposition groups in Nicaragua, which only 1 year later actively participated in the coup attempt of 2018.
María José Díaz, teleSUR, Nicaragua.
A 4-day summit for vaccine internationalism sponsored by the Progressive International began this Friday. The meeting's held virtually and its goal is securing COVID-19 vaccines for all. The summit brings together governments from the global south, political leaders, health workers and vaccine manufacturers from more than 20 countries.
The current pandemic has exposed the extent to which the representatives of some countries, the economic elites and the big pharmaceutical companies are willing to go to protect their own interests. They have valued profits and capital accumulation more than human life. This pandemic in itself poses major challenges for health systems worldwide due to its transmissibility and lethality. Argentina believes that securing equitable access to medicines and vaccines should be a priority for all states, as it is a necessary condition to promote the proper enjoyment of the right to health for all people. Our country is committed to vaccinate 100% of its population in a progressive, gradual manner, depending on the age risk, the underlying medical conditions, or the exposure to the virus. The science development, with ongoing clinical research, innovation and joint work with the Cuban technological and pharmaceutical industry has been a strength for the Cuban health system, contributing with new products and knowledge to the fight against this virus. Currently, for COVID-19, more than 1,000 research projects are registered and underway, including the launching of clinical trials of 5 Cuban vaccine candidates, 2 of which are in phase 3 of clinical trials. In this context, our country is carrying out a health intervention in at-risk groups and territories with 2 vaccine candidates, Soberana 02 and Abdala, which will enable 70% of the Cuban population to be vaccinated by the end of August.
The COVID-19 pandemic continues to take its toll on some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. Vaccines donated next year will be far too late, as reiterated in a World Health Organization update this Friday. At a press conference in Geneva, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, WHO Director General, remarked that even after 18 months, the ineffective use of public health and social measures, increased social mixing and vaccine inequity continue to give COVID-19 an opportunity to mutate, spread and kill. He noted that many countries in Latin America have rapidly increasing epidemics and others have plateaued at a high level. In Africa, cases have increased by 52% just in the past week, and deaths have increased by 32%, while things are only likely to get worse.
Vaccines donated next year will be far too late for those who are dying today, or being infected today, or at risk today. Our global targets are to vaccinate at least 10% of the population of every country by September, at least 40% by the end of the year, and 70% by the middle of next year. These are the critical milestones we must reach together to end the pandemic.
But the brutal reality is that in an era of multiple variants, with increased transmissibility, potentially increased impact, we have left vast swathes of the population and the vulnerable population in Africa unprotected by vaccines in a context where health systems are already weak. That's the reality. And this is the consequence of the current unfair distribution of vaccines. If we had been distributing vaccines fairly and equitably, we may by now have protected those people most vulnerable on the African continent, and we simply have not done that.
The Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, postponed for a year, could be held with limited public access to stadiums, even though a group of medical experts has advised against it due to the risk of COVID-19 infection. In a report, experts noted that the best way to hold the Games would be without spectators, as the Tokyo 2020 Organising Committee Chairwoman, Seiko Hashimoto, noted in a press conference. However, reports suggest that a 10,000-person cap could be applied under strict measures. On Monday, organisers will hold a meeting with representatives of the International Olympic and Paralympic Committees and the Japanese authorities with a view to making a final decision. And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. North Koreans must be prepared for conflict as much as for dialogue with the United States, warned the Democratic People's Republic of Korea's President, Kim Jong-Un. Kim's remarks were given to a Central Committee meeting of the ruling Korean Workers' Party. He was responding to United States President Joe Biden's stated initiative to resume dialogue with Pyongyang on nuclear arms control. The newly appointed US envoy for North Korea, Sung Kim, started this Friday a week-long trip to South Korea and Japan to coordinate possible talks with Kim Jong-un's government. Presidential elections were held in the Islamic Republic of Iran this Friday. 4 candidates are disputing the seat of head of state. Some 60 million Iranians were eligible to vote. From the early hours, long queues were formed outside polling stations, thus dismissing Western mainstream media speculations of a low turnout and widespread apathy among voters. Voting time was extended several times to accommodate incoming voters and to observe health protocols amid the COVID-19 pandemic, with all polling stations finally closing at 2 a.m. local time on Saturday. Ebrahim Raisi, the country's current judiciary chief, looks poised to emerge as the winner, having secured 57% of preferences in pre-election opinion polls. Incumbent President Hassan Rouhani was the first to cast his vote.
Our people know how important these elections are for the country, for their own fate, and for the Islamic Republic ruling system.
Protests continue in Lebanon after Thursday's general strike as the Lebanese pound reaches new lows against the US dollar. The economic crisis in the country continues to worsen. Lebanon has not had a government for more than 10 months, and in the absence of an economic recovery plan, fuel, electricity and medicines are now in short supply. In this context, the population continues on the streets to demand solutions to the crisis. The international community has conditioned the sending of economic aid to the formation of a new government, but local politicians have failed to reach an agreement for the formation of a cabinet. Ivory Coast former President Laurent Gbagbo has returned to his country after being acquitted by the International Criminal Court of charges of crimes against humanity. He spent 10 years in jail during the trial. Gbagbo was accused of crimes against humanity after his refusal to accept electoral defeat in 2010, a vote he had postponed 6 times, triggering a wave of violence that cost him 3,000 lives. The Hague-based International Court could not prove his responsibility for the killings, but he had to spend 10 years behind bars anyway. The winner of the 2010 election was precisely the man who now welcomed his former foe back home, President Alassane Ouattara. A move made for the sake of reconciliation, Ouattara said. With 76-year-old Gbagbo being greeted on arrival by crowds at the airport and in the streets of Abidjan, it remains to be seen how long that reconciliation will last. Women and children are among the main victims of the terrorist war imposed on Syria for more than 10 years. In order to alleviate the suffering and address the problems of this sector of Syrian society, the authorities are using every means at their disposal, including art. More on the following report from our correspondent Hisham Wanas.
The National Museum of Damascus is hosting an exhibition of artists and visual art students that illustrates the impact of war on the lives of Syrian children. The works on display, of different types, styles and techniques, embody the social problem of minors who have been forced to work and express the hope for an early solution that will give them back their childhood dreams stolen by terrorism and its sponsors.
My paintings reflect the situation of children who, due to the war, lost their parents and were forced to work to survive. And my idea is to make people aware of this tragic reality of children who lost their childhood. Working children represents a hard reality of lost childhood, and our picture reflects this social problem with the aim of mobilizing society to intensify the efforts to reduce the spread of this phenomenon.
This exhibition is part of the official plan to help children affected by the war. because art is one of the tools we use to solve the problems of society, including the problem of working children that we exhibit here in the paintings of visual artists.
In parallel, the Khan Assad Basha Caravanserai in the old city of Damascus is hosting the annual Spring 2021 exhibition. The works on display were devoted on this occasion to reflecting on the themes of women, war, and human emotions, the suffering of women refugees due to the cold and difficult living conditions, as well as the psychological state of breast cancer patients, were among the main issues that the artists expressed in their paintings exhibited at the event.
Through this exhibition, the artists contribute with their paintings to express the reality of the current situation in the country in the midst of war and blockade, and in particular on this occasion the suffering of Syrian women, and at the same time this joint exhibition allows us to present our idea as a youth layer.
Art, in its different forms, is one of the many tools used by the government and citizens of Syria to overcome the ravages of war, a civilized practice that has its roots in the millennial cultural history of the Syrian people, distant from the terrorism that ravages their country.
teleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram, plus you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.